On the west side of Chicago, there's a building where nearly 2,000 people once built bicycles by hand, 6 days a week, 50 weeks a year. If you learned to ride as a kid in America any time between 1950 and 1985, there's a good chance your first taste of freedom rolled out of that building. 1 in 4 bicycles sold in the United States carried the Schwinn name. It was the bike under the Christmas tree, the bike in the garage, the bike your parents didn't have to think about because their parents didn't have to think about it either. Schwinn survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the collapse of the first bicycle boom, and 70 years of competitors trying to take its crown. A company that durable should have lasted forever. In 1992, Schwinn filed for bankruptcy. Market share had fallen from 1 in 4 to roughly 1 in 14. The company owed $75 million it couldn't repay, and annual sales had flatlined at 900,000 units while the rest of the industry doubled and tripled around it. In less than 20 years, the most trusted name in American cycling became a debt case with a silent factory. It wasn't foreign competition alone. It wasn't a corrupt CEO. It wasn't one catastrophic bet that went wrong overnight. There was a man on that factory floor, a frame welder with decades on the line, who could hear whether a joint was right before the weld cooled. He knew by the tick of contracting metal, by the color of the bead, by the smell of flux burning clean versus flux burning dirty. 3 senses doing the work of an inspection station. That knowledge wasn't replaced by a machine. It was made irrelevant when the work moved to a factory on a different continent where the question was never quality. The question was cost. How does a company eliminate the workforce that built its reputation and expect the reputation to hold? How does an entire industry decide that the place where something is made no longer matters? And what happens to all the things a person knows how to do when nobody needs them done here anymore? This is the story of what happens when a company's greatest achievement, the system that made it unbreakable, becomes the thing it can't escape. The rise, the reign, and the slow silencing of the factory that built America's bicycle. Stay with this one. Chicago, 1895. A German immigrant named Ignaz Schwinn walks into a small factory on the north side of the city and decides he's going to build bicycles. He's not the first. He won't be the last, but he's going to be the one who stays. America in the 1890s is bicycle crazy. Hundreds of manufacturers are cranking out wheels as fast as they can, chasing a national obsession that looks like it will never end. Ignaz doesn't have the biggest factory. He doesn't have the most money. What he has is a mechanic's obsession with how things fit together and an immigrant's understanding that nothing in this country is guaranteed. He partners with a meatpacking magnate named Adolf Arnold, and together they incorporate Arnold, Schwinn and Company. Arnold brings capital, Ignaz brings hands. Within 5 years, the bicycle boom collapses. Hundreds of manufacturers fold. The streets that were filled with new riders go quiet, and the factories that were printing money are suddenly printing debt. One by one, the competitors vanish. 50 makers in Chicago at the start of the decade. A handful left, standing by the end. Ignaz doesn't panic. He watches. He calculates. And while other companies liquidate, he buys their tooling, hires their best workers, and absorbs their dealer relationships. The weak die first. The desperate follow. And the survivors don't just survive. They dominate. By the early 1900s, Schwinn is the name. Not the biggest yet, but the most stubborn, the most consistent, the company that keeps showing up when others quit. Ignaz runs the factory like a man who knows what it feels like to lose everything, because he does. Every bike that leaves the floor has to be right, not innovative, not flashy. Right? And this is the thing about Schwinn that most people miss when they tell this story. The company doesn't become an empire because of one brilliant product or one genius marketing campaign. It becomes an empire because of something much quieter. Reliability, predictability, trust. A Schwinn dealer in 1920 knows exactly what he's getting. The margins are fair. The quality is steady. The bikes don't come back broken. In a country that's industrializing at full speed, where every week brings a new brand and a new promise, Schwinn's pitch is almost boring. We make the same thing the same way, every time, and it works. By the time the Second World War ends, Schwinn is positioned for something extraordinary. 16 million Americans come home from the war. They move to suburbs. They start families. They have children, and those children are going to need bicycles. Not European bicycles, not department store junk. American bicycles, built by a company their parents already trust. Ignaz Schwinn dies in 1948, but his son Frank takes the wheel and pushes the company into its golden age. The 1950s belong to Schwinn the way the decade belongs to chrome and confidence. 1 in 4 bicycles sold in America carries the Schwinn name. Not 1 in 10, not 1 in 5, 1 in 4. Think about that number for a moment. A quarter of every bicycle sold in the entire United States rolls out of Schwinn's orbit. The dealer network stretches from coast to coast. The factory on the west side of Chicago hums 6 days a week. Nearly 2,000 workers clock in every morning, and most of them don't have college degrees, and none of them need one. They have a trade, they have a union, they have a wage that buys a house and puts kids through school. This is Schwinn at full power, not just a company, a system. The factory builds the bikes, the dealers sell the bikes, the families ride the bikes, and then those families grow up, have their own kids, and buy Schwinns again. It's a loop that feels permanent. It feels American in the way that certain things felt American in the 1950s, solid and self-sustaining, and built to last exactly as long as the country lasts. The flagship model is the Black Phantom, a chrome-heavy cruiser that weighs more than some children can lift. It's not fast, it's not light, but it looks like it was built to survive a war and still get you to school on time. Every kid on the block either has one or wants one. And here's where the story starts to turn, even though nobody inside Schwinn can feel it yet. The same stability that builds this empire is already becoming a trap. The factory that works so well has no reason to change. The production methods that deliver consistent quality have no pressure to evolve. The dealer network that covers America is so loyal that it filters out bad news before it reaches the top. Schwinn doesn't lose because people stop riding bicycles. Schwinn doesn't lose because the brand stops being trusted. Schwinn loses while the bicycle itself is transforming into something the company doesn't recognize. But that's later. Right now, in the 1950s, the machines are running. The paychecks are steady. And the name on the down tube is the only name that matters. A factory isn't only steel and schedules, it's rhythm. And rhythm hates change. The 1960s arrive and Schwinn is still the king, but the kingdom is starting to age in ways that don't show up on a balance sheet. The Chicago factory is the heart of the operation, and it beats the same way it has beaten for decades. Same machines, same methods, same layout on the floor. Workers who started in the 1940s are training workers who will stay into the 1980s, and the knowledge passes hand to hand like a family recipe. Nobody writes it down because nobody needs to. The system works. Except the world outside the factory is moving. Fast. In Europe and Japan, bicycle manufacturing is becoming something closer to precision engineering. Lighter frames, better alloys. Components designed to be swapped and upgraded rather than welded in place forever. The new generation of bikes coming out of Italy, France, and Japan aren't just transportation. They're machines built for speed, for sport, for a rider who cares about grams and gear ratios and the difference between steel and aluminum. Schwinn looks at this and sees a niche, a fad for enthusiasts, not a threat. This is the pattern that kills great companies. Not a single catastrophic decision, but a slow, invisible agreement to interpret the future as a minor variation of the past. The Chicago plant is tooled for heavy cruisers and standard bikes. Retooling costs money. It disrupts production. It means telling 2,000 workers that the way they've been doing things for 20 years isn't good enough anymore. And for what? For a trend that might pass? So the machines keep running. The bikes keep shipping. And every year, the gap between what Schwinn builds and what the cutting edge of cycling looks like gets a little wider. The thing is, Schwinn isn't stupid. The people running the company can read a catalog. They know lightweight 10-speeds exist. They even start producing their own version, the Varsity and the Continental, and these bikes sell reasonably well through the late 1960s and into the 1970s. The problem isn't awareness. The problem is commitment. Schwinn makes lightweight bikes the way a steakhouse makes salads. It's on the menu, but it's not why you're here. The real investment stays in the Chicago factory. The real pride stays in the traditional product line. And the real institutional knowledge, the thing that 2,000 workers carry in their hands every morning, is calibrated for a type of bicycle that is slowly becoming yesterday's standard. Meanwhile, a revolution is brewing in Northern California. Young riders in Marin County are taking old Schwinn cruisers, stripping them down, and riding them off-road on mountain fire trails. They're destroying the bikes in the process, rebuilding them with motorcycle parts, inventing something that doesn't have a name yet. Within a few years, it will be called the mountain bike. It will become the biggest category in American cycling. And Schwinn will watch it happen from the outside. But we're getting ahead of the story. In the 1970s, the immediate problem isn't mountain bikes. It's something closer to home. The bicycle boom of the early 1970s catches everyone off guard. The oil crisis, the fitness movement, and environmental consciousness collide, and suddenly Americans are buying bikes at a rate nobody predicted. 10-speed sales explode. Schwinn benefits from this wave, but not as much as it should, because the company can't produce enough lightweight bikes fast enough. The Chicago factory is geared for a different kind of production. The supply chain is domestic and rigid. Competitors with more flexible manufacturing, including importers who can tap into Japanese production, fill the gap. Schwinn responds by doing something that feels practical in the moment but carries a long fuse. The company begins sourcing components and eventually complete bikes from overseas manufacturers. The logic is clean, demand is high, domestic capacity is limited, foreign production is cheaper and faster. Just this once, we'll supplement. Every temporary fix becomes permanent policy. That's not a Schwinn problem. That's a manufacturing problem. But at Schwinn, it hits different because the entire brand identity is built on the idea of American-made quality from an American factory with American workers. Every bike that arrives from overseas is a small crack in that story. Not visible to customers yet, but visible on the factory floor. The workers in Chicago can count. They can see the shipping containers. They know what supplemental production means when the supplement keeps growing and the domestic orders keep flattening. The trust between the workforce and management, the thing that held the whole system together through decades of steady production, is starting to thin. And trust, once it thins, doesn't thicken back on its own. The factory is still running. The brand is still strong. 1 in 4 bikes sold in America still means something, even if the fraction is starting to slip. But inside the plant, the rhythm is off. Machines that should have been replaced 10 years ago are being patched again. Production methods that made sense in 1955 are being stretched to cover 1975. The building itself feels like a man wearing a suit from a decade ago, still presentable, still functional, but no longer quite right for the room he's standing in. Outdated machines don't just break, they persuade you to keep patching. Every repair is a small vote against the future, a tiny decision to stay where you are instead of moving to where you need to be. And Schwinn has been casting those votes for years. The factory that once made the most dependable bikes in America is becoming dependent on its own past. September 1980. The workers walk out. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without warning. The tension has been building for years, the way pressure builds in a pipe that nobody inspects. Inflation is eating wages. The cost of living in Chicago is climbing. Workers who could raise a family on a Schwinn paycheck in 1965 are struggling to keep up in 1980. They look at the company and see a brand that still sells millions of dollars in bicycles. They look at their paychecks and see a number that hasn't kept pace with the grocery store. Management looks at the same situation and sees something different. They see a factory that costs too much to run. They see foreign competitors who can build a comparable bike for a fraction of the labor cost. They see a domestic market where margins are thinning, and every dollar spent on wages is a dollar not spent on retooling, on marketing, on the lightweight bikes that the market is demanding louder every year. Two fears collide. The workers fear falling behind. Management fears setting a precedent they can't sustain. Roughly 1,400 workers hit the picket line, 1,400 people who know how to build a Schwinn bicycle from bare tubing to boxed product. 1,400 people whose fathers, in some cases, held the same jobs in the same building. This isn't just a labor dispute, it's a family argument, and like most family arguments, the damage goes deeper than the words. The strike lasts 13 weeks, 13 weeks of empty production lines, 13 weeks of silent machines, 13 weeks where the factory that has run almost without interruption since the Second World War simply stops. 13 weeks, 1,400 workers, and when it ends, not everyone comes back. That last part is the detail that changes everything. A strike that ends with full recall is a negotiation. A strike that ends with partial recall is a rupture. Workers who walked out together don't all walk back in together. Some positions are eliminated. Some are never refilled. The workforce that returns is smaller, and the contract they return under is a compromise that satisfies nobody completely. The people who come back can feel the difference. The factory is the same building, the same machines, the same fluorescent lights buzzing over the same concrete floor. But the air is different. Before the strike, the factory was a place where you built your career. After the strike, the factory is a place where you watch your back. Management draws its own conclusions from the 13 weeks. The lesson they take is not that they need to rebuild trust with the workforce. The lesson they take is that domestic production is a vulnerability. A factory full of workers who can walk out is a factory that can be shut down at the worst possible moment. The strike doesn't make Schwinn's leadership love the Chicago plant less. It makes them trust it less. And that distinction matters enormously, because the next set of decisions flows directly from that broken trust. If domestic production is a risk, then reduce the risk. If American labor is expensive and unpredictable, then find labor that is cheaper and more controllable. If the factory can hold you hostage, then make sure you have alternatives. The offshoring accelerates, not all at once, not with a single announcement, but steadily, year after year, more production moves overseas. First components, then subassemblies, then complete bicycles. Each step makes financial sense in isolation, each step is defensible in a boardroom, and each step hollows out the reason the Chicago factory exists. The workers can see it happening. They're not fools. Every container that arrives from Asia is a message written in shipping labels. You are replaceable. Your skills are transferable. Your wages are a line item that someone in an office is comparing to a number on a different continent. And here's the irony that sits at the center of this whole story. The strike was supposed to protect the workers' position. It was supposed to demonstrate their value, their indispensability, the fact that without them, the factory doesn't run, and the bikes don't ship. And it did demonstrate that. For 13 weeks, Schwinn couldn't build bicycles. The proof was total. But the proof cut both ways. Management saw the same 13 weeks and arrived at the opposite conclusion. Not that the workers were indispensable, but that depending on them was dangerous. The thing the workers demonstrated as strength, management interpreted as threat. They wanted to prove they mattered. They proved it so completely that the company decided it couldn't afford to let them matter that much again. The factory keeps running after the strike. Diminished, but running. The bikes still ship. The name still sells. But the relationship between the company and its workforce has crossed a line that neither side knows how to uncross. Every negotiation from here forward happens in the shadow of those 13 weeks. Every management decision about production location happens with the memory of a silent factory. A factory can run with old machines. Machines don't have grievances. Machines don't walk out. Machines don't remember. A factory can't run with broken trust. The 1980s are supposed to be Schwinn's reinvention decade. That's the plan anyway. New leadership, new strategy, new willingness to spend money to modernize the brand and recapture the market position that has been quietly eroding since the mid-1970s. The family is still in control. The name still carries enormous weight with American consumers. And the thinking inside the company is straightforward. We've been too cautious for too long. It's time to invest. So Schwinn borrows heavily. The number that will eventually appear in the bankruptcy filing is approximately $75 million. Say it slowly, $75 million. In the 1980s, for a bicycle company that is already losing market share, that number is not an investment. It's a bet. And like all bets, it comes with a clock. Debt works like a factory machine. It demands steady throughput. It needs to be fed on schedule, every month, every quarter, regardless of whether the market cooperates or the product line is hitting or the economy decides to take a turn. You can negotiate with a supplier. You can delay a product launch. You can furlough workers. You cannot negotiate with a loan payment. The payment doesn't care about your brand history. It doesn't care that your grandfather built this company from nothing. It cares about the number and the date. Schwinn takes on this debt to modernize, to compete, to transform itself from a legacy manufacturer into a contemporary brand that can fight on multiple fronts. And some of the money goes to real improvements. But the problem with borrowing to fix a slow decline is that the fixes have to work fast enough to outrun the interest. And Schwinn's fixes don't work fast. Part of the reason is structural. The company is trying to do too many things at once. Maintain domestic production while expanding overseas sourcing. Protect the dealer network while experimenting with new retail channels. Defend the traditional product line while chasing the lightweight and specialty categories that competitors are dominating. Each of these goals makes sense individually. Together, they pull the company in 6 directions while the debt clock ticks in 1. Part of the reason is cultural. Schwinn has been a cautious company for almost a century. Ignatz built the business on consistency, not on risk. 3 generations of management have internalized the principle that you don't chase trends, you build foundations. That instinct served the company beautifully for decades. But caution and debt don't coexist well. Debt demands speed. Caution demands patience. When you owe $75 million, patience is a luxury with a monthly surcharge, and part of the reason is competitive. While Schwinn is borrowing and reorganizing and trying to modernize from within, the market isn't waiting. Trek is building a reputation for high-quality American-designed bikes. Specialized is owning the mountain bike revolution. Giant, out of Taiwan, is becoming the world's most efficient bicycle manufacturer. These companies aren't burdened by 90 years of tradition. They don't have aging factories. They don't have dealer networks that resist change. They don't have a workforce that remembers a strike. They have clean balance sheets and clear focus, and the freedom to build exactly what the market wants right now. Schwinn is dragging history, and history weighs more when you're paying interest on it. The debt does something else that doesn't show up in financial statements. It changes the psychology of every decision. When you're debt-free, you can afford to experiment. You can launch a product that might fail, enter a market that might not pan out, invest in research that won't pay off for 5 years. When you owe $75 million, every decision gets filtered through a single question. Will this help us make the next payment? And that filter kills the kind of long-term thinking that Schwinn desperately needs. The company can't afford to be wrong, so it becomes afraid to be bold. And in a market that is rewarding boldness, being afraid is its own kind of death. You don't hear debt. It doesn't make a sound on the factory floor. It doesn't show up in the paint finish or the spoke tension or the way a wheel spins. The bikes still look like Schwinn's. The logo still shines. But underneath the chrome, every bicycle the company sells is carrying an invisible weight. $75 million of debt doesn't sound like a death sentence. Not for a company with national name recognition and 90 years of history and a dealer network that spans the continent. It sounds survivable, manageable, the kind of number that a good year or two could absorb. But debt is a schedule that never sleeps. And Schwinn's good years are behind it. The building stays open, the machines keep turning. But every revolution of every wheel is now measured against a number that gets heavier with every quarter that doesn't quite perform. The company isn't building bicycles anymore. It's servicing alone and building bicycles with whatever energy is left over. You don't hear debt. You hear what debt prevents. The retooling that doesn't happen. The product line that doesn't launch. The engineer who doesn't get hired. The future that doesn't arrive because the present is already spoken for. Here's what's happening outside while Schwinn is wrestling with its own weight. The American bicycle market is exploding, but it's exploding in directions Schwinn doesn't control. The mountain bike is the big one. What started with a handful of lunatics in Marin County riding modified Schwinn cruisers down fire roads has become the fastest-growing segment in the industry. By the mid-1980s, mountain bikes aren't a fad. They're the future. Knobby tires, flat handlebars, rugged frames built to absorb punishment. A generation of riders who grew up on BMX bikes is graduating to something bigger and rougher, and they don't care about chrome or tradition. They care about function. Specialized sees it first. Tom Ritchie and Mike Sinyard put the Stump Jumper on the market in 1981, and it's one of the first mass-produced mountain bikes in the world. Trek follows, Giant follows, Cannondale follows. By the time the category is clearly dominant, these companies own it. They own the technology, the credibility, the shelf space, and the rider loyalty. Schwinn looks at mountain bikes and sees a trend it can join late. The company eventually produces mountain bikes, but the effort feels half-committed. The designs are adequate, not inspired. The marketing is careful, not passionate. And the core problem is deeper than any single product. Schwinn's identity is built on being the safe choice, the brand your parents trust, the name that means quality without surprises. Mountain biking is the opposite of that. It's rough, it's new, it's built on the idea that the old way of riding is boring. Schwinn trying to sell mountain bikes is like a bank trying to sell skateboards. The product might be fine, but the messenger is wrong. The same pattern repeats across multiple categories. Road racing bikes are getting lighter, more aerodynamic, more technologically sophisticated every year. European and Japanese component manufacturers are pushing the boundaries of what a bicycle drivetrain can do. Shimano transforms from a modest parts supplier into a global powerhouse that dictates the technology standard for the entire industry. Riders who care about performance start choosing bikes based on components first and brand second. And Schwinn's component spec, constrained by cost pressure and debt service, can't keep up. BMX is another missed window. The category explodes in the late 1970s and early 1980s, driven by kids who want to race and jump and do tricks. Schwinn makes BMX bikes. They sell. But the company never dominates the category the way it dominated cruisers in the 1950s, because BMX culture doesn't want a parent-approved brand. It wants rebellion. It wants brands that feel like they belong to the riders, not to the rider's mother. Category after category. Trend after trend. The market keeps expanding, and Schwinn keeps showing up a step behind, offering a version of what the leaders already defined. The company isn't failing in any single dramatic way. It's failing in the most exhausting way possible. Slowly, steadily. Losing half a point of market share here, a key retail placement there, a generation of riders who grow up associating Schwinn with their childhood instead of their future, and the numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. While the total American bicycle market grows through the 1980s, Schwinn's sales stay flat, stuck, lodged in a band around 900,000 units per year. That sounds like a lot of bikes, and it is. But in a growing market, flat is falling. 900,000 units in an expanding pie means your slice is shrinking every single year, even if the number on your own reports doesn't move. 900,000. That's the ceiling number. The number that says you're still here, but you've stopped growing. The number that says the market has decided what you're worth and you haven't done anything to change its mind. Meanwhile, Trek and Specialized and Giant aren't standing still. They're investing in carbon fiber. They're signing professional racing teams. They're building relationships with the new specialty bike shops that are replacing the old Schwinn dealer network as the place where serious riders buy serious bikes. The industry is moving up market and Schwinn is stuck in the middle, too expensive to compete on price with department store brands, too stale to compete on innovation with the new performance companies. Schwinn's own dealer network, once its greatest asset, becomes part of the trap. The dealers are loyal. They've been loyal for decades, but loyalty goes both ways, and many Schwinn dealers are small shops that serve a traditional customer base. They're not the kind of stores that attract the young mountain biker or the weekend road racer. They're the kind of stores that sell a Schwinn to a dad who remembers riding one as a kid. That customer still exists. But that customer alone can't sustain an empire. The factory can build what you ask it to build. It can stamp frames and lace wheels and box up bicycles by the thousand. The machines don't care about market trends. They care about the order sheet. But if the order sheet keeps saying 900,000 while the rest of the industry says 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, then the factory is building a monument to standing still. The question isn't whether the factory can produce. The question is whether anyone is asking it to produce tomorrow's bicycle. And nobody is. By the late 1980s, Schwinn's manufacturing footprint in America is a shadow of what it used to be. The Chicago factory, the original heartbeat, has been winding down for years. Production has been shifting overseas in stages, each stage a little larger than the last, each stage a little harder to reverse. The company opens a plant in Greenville, Mississippi, partly as a cost play, partly as a statement. We still build bikes in America. The statement matters to the brand. The economics matter to the balance sheet. And for a while, the two coexist. Greenville is supposed to be the modern answer to Chicago. Lower labor costs, a newer facility, a chance to start fresh without the weight of a 90-year-old factory and the memory of a 13-week strike. But starting fresh costs money, and money is exactly what Schwinn doesn't have in surplus. The $75 million debt doesn't care about fresh starts. It cares about payments. The Greenville plant operates in an impossible position. It needs to be cost competitive with overseas manufacturers who pay a fraction of American wages. It needs to produce bikes that match the quality expectations of the Schwinn name. And it needs to do both while the parent company is bleeding cash, losing market share, and trying to fund a transformation that never quite transforms. The workers in Greenville don't have the generational history of the Chicago workforce. They don't have fathers and grandfathers who built Schwinns. But they have the same basic deal. Show up, do the work, build a good product, and the company takes care of you. That deal, the American manufacturing bargain, is the same in Mississippi as it was in Illinois. And it's under the same pressure. By 1990, the math is closing in. Every bike built in Greenville costs more than a comparable bike built in Taiwan or China. Not because the workers are less skilled, not because the facility is poorly managed, Because the global economics of manufacturing have shifted so far and so fast that domestic production of consumer goods at this price point is becoming an act of will rather than an act of business logic. Schwinn's leadership faces the decision that has been coming for a decade. Keep the American plant open and accept the cost disadvantage, or close it and accept that Schwinn is no longer an American manufacturer in any meaningful sense. The brand can survive without a factory. The identity can survive without a production line. The logo doesn't need a building. But the workers need the building, and the community needs the workers. In 1991, Schwinn closes the Greenville plant. The announcement is not dramatic. There is no explosion, no scandal, no footage of a CEO being hauled before Congress. A plant closes, workers are laid off. Production shifts to contractors overseas. It's the kind of story that makes the local paper and the industry trade press and then vanishes. Because in 1991 America, a factory closing is not extraordinary. It is routine, and that routine is part of the tragedy. The workers in Greenville clean out their lockers. They return their badges. They walk out of a building that will not call them back. Some will find other manufacturing jobs. Some will leave manufacturing entirely because the other factories in the area are under the same pressure from the same global forces, and the options are narrowing everywhere. What dies in Greenville isn't just a production line. It's the last physical connection between the Schwinn name and American labor. After Greenville, Schwinn bikes are designed in America, marketed in America, sold in America, but built somewhere else. The brand becomes a flag without a flagpole. It waves, but it's not planted in anything you can touch. And for the workers, the ones in Chicago and the ones in Greenville and all the ones in between who built Schwinns with their hands for decades, the closing of the last plant is the end of a specific promise. The promise that a manufacturing job at a respected company was a doorway into the middle class, that you could graduate high school, learn a trade, walk into a factory, and build a life. Not a glamorous life, not a wealthy life, but a stable one, a dignified one, a life where what you made with your hands had your employer's name on it, and that name meant something. That promise doesn't die in a courtroom or a boardroom. It dies in a parking lot in Mississippi when the last shift ends and the lights go down. Schwinn is still a company after Greenville closes. It still has employees, mostly in offices now. It still has a dealer network, though it's shrinking. It still has the name, and the name is still worth something. But the thing that made Schwinn different from 1,000 other brands, the thing that connected the logo to a real place with real machines and real people building a real product, that thing is gone. The building stays. It always stays. The work leaves first, and then the people leave. And then the building just sits there, a shell with a loading dock and an empty parking lot, and nothing inside but echoes and dust. When the last plant goes quiet, the paperwork is next. There's a moment after the final shift where the air still expects people. Footsteps that don't come, a time clock that nobody punches, a conveyor belt that has forgotten how to move. October 1992. Schwinn files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The date lands like a period at the end of a sentence that's been writing itself for 15 years. Nothing about the filing is a surprise to anyone who has been paying attention. Not to the workers who watched production leave the country. Not to the dealers who watched their orders shrink. Not to the competitors who watched Schwinn fumble category after category while the market ran ahead. The only people surprised are the customers, the millions of Americans who still think of Schwinn as the bicycle company, the default, the name that was always there. For them, the filing is a shock. For everyone inside the industry, it's a funeral that's been scheduled for years. The numbers in the filing read like a medical chart for a patient who stopped responding to treatment a long time ago. Market share that stood at roughly 25% in the 1950s has fallen to approximately 7%. 1 in 4 has become something closer to 1 in 14. The company that once defined the category now occupies a shrinking corner of it, squeezed from above by performance brands and from below by cheap imports. Debt stands at approximately $75 million. The number that was supposed to fund a reinvention has instead become the weight that prevents one. Every dollar that goes to debt service is a dollar that doesn't go to product development, to marketing, to the kind of bold moves that Trek and Specialized are making every quarter. Schwinn is paying for its past, while its competitors invest in the future. Annual sales have been stuck at around 900,000 units. In a growing market, that flat line is a decline by another name. The company is selling the same volume into a larger pool, which means every year it becomes a smaller fraction of the whole. And 900,000 units at Schwinn's margins, burdened by Schwinn's debt, managed by Schwinn's overhead, isn't enough. It hasn't been enough for years. The leadership explains the filing in financial terms: the debt burden, the weak economy, the competitive pressure. And all of that is true, but the financial explanation is the surface of a deeper story, and the deeper story is about time. Schwinn ran out of time to modernize, ran out of time to adapt, ran out of time to become the company it needed to be while still paying for the company it used to be. The bankruptcy courtroom is a strange place for a brand like Schwinn to end up. Creditors line up with claims, lawyers argue over assets. The conversation is about liquidation values and restructuring plans and the priority of secured versus unsecured debt. Nobody in that room is talking about the Black Phantom, or the feeling of riding a new bike on a summer morning, or the sound of a factory running at full capacity. The courtroom speaks one language, the brand speaks another. And in bankruptcy, the courtroom's language is the only one that counts. Chapter 11 is not liquidation. It's protection, a chance to reorganize, to shed obligations, to emerge leaner and theoretically viable. And Schwinn does eventually emerge, though not as an independent company. The brand is sold. It changes hands. It becomes an asset managed by people who didn't build it, attached to products built in factories that Ignaz Schwinn never saw, sold in stores that don't carry the old dealer loyalty, ridden by customers who know the name, but not the history. The brand lives. That's the outcome. Schwinn bicycles still exist. You can buy one today. The name is on the down tube, and the logo is on the head badge, and the bike rolls and stops and does everything a bicycle is supposed to do. But the company that built those bikes in Chicago with 2,000 workers and a quarter of the American market and a factory that hummed 6 days a week, that company is gone. The bankruptcy filing is just the document that makes it official. The real death happened earlier, in stages, across decades. The strike that broke trust, the debt that froze strategy, the market shifts that went unanswered, the plants that closed one by one until there was nothing left to close. Schwinn is still famous on the day it files for bankruptcy. Everybody knows the name. Everybody has a memory. A first bike, a Christmas morning, a kid pedaling down a sidewalk with training wheels that haven't come off yet. The brand carries more emotional equity than most companies will ever accumulate in a century of trying. Fame doesn't pay creditors. Memories don't service debt. And a name, no matter how beloved, is just a word if there's no machine behind it. The courtroom is loud with legal procedure and financial argument and the shuffling of documents that reduce 97 years of history to a stack of claims. Across town, the factory is silent. The machines that built a quarter of America's bicycles are still. The time clocks are stopped. The parking lot is empty. The silence was first. The courtroom just confirmed what the factory already knew. After the filing, after the sale, after the brand passes from the family that built it to the corporations that will manage it, the factory still stands. Buildings outlast the businesses that fill them. That's one of the cruel facts of industrial collapse. The workers leave, the machines are sold or scrapped, the product moves to another continent. But the building stays because demolition costs money, and nobody's in a hurry to spend it. If you could walk through that factory in the years after Schwinn's collapse, you'd find the usual archaeology of abandonment. dust on surfaces that were wiped clean every shift for decades, inventory tags for parts that no longer exist, a payroll office with empty desks, loading docks that open onto nothing. The building doesn't know it's obsolete. It just stands there, waiting for people who aren't coming back. This is what industrial collapse looks like when it isn't a scandal. No fraud, no embezzlement, no villain twirling a mustache in a corner office. Just a sequence of rational decisions, each one defensible, each one logical, each one a small step away from the thing that made the company what it was. And when you line up all those rational decisions end to end, they draw a straight line from dominance to bankruptcy. So why did Schwinn collapse? Not why did it file for Chapter 11 on a specific date in October 1992, but why did a company that once owned a quarter of the American bicycle market end up with 7% and $75 million in debt and a silent factory? The answer isn't one thing, it's four things, and each one forces the next. First, the manufacturing lag. Schwinn's production system was built for a world that stopped existing in the 1960s. Heavy cruisers, steel frames, traditional methods. The factory was a masterpiece of mid-century consistency, and that consistency became a prison. When the market demanded lighter bikes, faster innovation, new materials, Schwinn's physical plant couldn't respond without a retooling investment that the company kept deferring. Every year the upgrade didn't happen, the cost of the upgrade grew, and the gap between Schwinn's capabilities and the market's expectations widened. The machines didn't fail. They just became fluent in the wrong language. And that forces the next. Second, the labor fracture. The 1980 strike didn't cause Schwinn's collapse, but it broke something that never healed. 1,400 workers on a picket line for 13 weeks, and when it ended, the relationship between the company and its workforce was permanently altered. Management stopped seeing the factory as a home and started seeing it as a liability. Workers stopped seeing management as partners and started seeing them as a threat. The strike was supposed to be a negotiation. It became a divorce. And every decision about offshoring, about closing plants, about moving production overseas, happened faster and with less resistance because the emotional bond between the brand and its builders was already severed. And that forces the next. Third, the strategic contradiction. Schwinn tried to be two things at once and ended up being neither. An American-made brand that increasingly wasn't American-made. A traditional company chasing innovation it didn't believe in. A mass-market name trying to compete in specialty categories it entered too late. The company was half in and half out of every major strategic position. Half committed to domestic production, half committed to overseas sourcing. Half committed to its traditional customers, half committed to the new mountain bike and performance segments. Every half commitment diluted the one before it. The brand that used to mean one clear thing started meaning nothing in particular. And that forces the next. Fourth, the financial constraint. $75 million in debt transforms every other problem from difficult to impossible. Without the debt, Schwinn might have had the breathing room to retool slowly, to rebuild trust with its workforce, to commit fully to a new strategic direction. With the debt, every quarter that didn't perform was a quarter closer to insolvency. The debt didn't cause the collapse. It set the timer on the collapse. It turned a slow decline into a countdown. Manufacturing lag forces labor fracture. Labor fracture forces offshoring. Offshoring forces strategic contradiction. Strategic contradiction forces debt, and debt forces the clock. Each problem alone is survivable. Together, they are a system that produces exactly one outcome. The factory didn't fail in one day. It just got quieter every year. One fewer shift, one fewer product line, one fewer generation of workers who could look at the building and see a future. The collapse of Schwinn isn't a story about bad people or stupid decisions. It's a story about a system that was perfect for one era and couldn't transform into a system for the next. The people inside the system could see the problem. Most of them could even describe it. But seeing a trap and escaping a trap are two different things, and Schwinn never found the exit. The name still rides. You can walk into a store today and buy a bicycle with Schwinn written on the frame. The logo is clean. The paint is fresh. The bike works fine. But the hands that build it are on the other side of the world, and the factory that gave the name its meaning is a memory that gets fainter every year. Ignaz Schwinn came to Chicago in the 1890s with a mechanic's skill and an immigrant's hunger, and built something that lasted almost a century. 1 in 4 bicycles, 2,000 workers, a name that meant something to every kid on every block in every town in America. That's not a small legacy. That's a monument. But monuments don't adapt. They stand still, and the world moves around them. And one day you look up, and the monument is in the wrong part of town, facing the wrong direction, honoring something that the present doesn't need anymore. The last lesson is the simplest. Your reputation buys you time. It doesn't buy you forever. The market doesn't care what you built yesterday. It cares about what you're building now. And if the answer to that question is the same thing you were building 30 years ago, then the market has already made its decision. It's just waiting for you to notice. Some factories don't burn down. They don't explode. They don't collapse in a dramatic heap of steel and flame that makes the evening news. They simply stop being necessary. The lights go off. The doors close. The parking lot empties. And the name on the building, the name that used to mean something to everyone who drove past, becomes just another word on just another wall in just another town that used to make things.